everyone, welcome to the fifth video of Module 2, and here you are going to understand what are some basic data types available in Python. We are not going to talk about all of the data types, just some of them, including string, integer and float. Okay, and also when I'm going to start the video, I'm also going to talk about a concept of runtime in Google Colab. It's really important, guys, that you understand this particular concept. So I'm just going to start with this concept in this video, so let's get into it. So now let's look into the strings. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create one text cell, give a heading as strings. Okay. And now if I press shift enter, it automatically creates a code cell for me. Now one thing, okay, before I'm starting the explanation of the concepts of strings, I really want to show you what really happens if you try to click on this runtime and let's say for example you want to restart your notebook. Okay, so what you do is you click on restart runtime. It's saying that whatever kind of memory that was stored in this notebook, everything will be reset. And if I let's say click on yes, and now if I try to run this code, see what's going to happen. It's going to throw an error this time because xy, this small x and small y variables are gone because I deleted all the memory by restarting my runtime. So that's one thing that you need to keep in mind. Okay, if you want to define this x and y, and if you're then removing it and changing it to some other thing, then you should be cautious about that thing. So now moving on to the strings and the concepts with respect to that. So what is the whole idea behind the strings, right? So let's say if you're having some kind of a numeric data, you know how you can assign it to some kind of variable or constants. That's fine. But now what do you, if you're having some kind of a text data that you want to assign to a variable? For example, let's say I'm trying to create some sort of variables, create variables to store the information about a planet in our solar system. Let's say the first thing that I'm trying to store is the name of the planet. So I need to assign some kind of a variable to that particular name of the planet that I'm going to use. So for that, again, I'll have to create a variable, right? So let's say I'm going to call it as a planet name, something like this. You can also call it as a name underscore planet, anything that you like. Now over here, if I want to give a name as Venus like this, it's not going to work. Why? Because there is nothing like Venus that we have defined anywhere, just like for this x and y that we had seen in our previous video, and even for that matter in the starting of this video. If we did not define this small x small y, it's going to give you this kind of yellow kind of line below that thing that hey, you haven't given me any kind of value that we need to give to Venus. So it's going to run into an error that Venus is not defined. If I go ahead and run this, it's going to say that name Venus is not defined because we haven't given any value to this. So if you want to assign a text data to some kind of a variable, you always do it with the help of this kind of quotation marks. Now this quotation marks is going to ensure that okay, now this is a string. This is called as a string in Python. And now if you run this, it is storing this kind of text data in the variable called planet name. Now if I want to go ahead and print this thing, let's say I'm trying to print the name of this planet by calling the variable in which I have stored it, and now you will be seeing that it's printing the Venus value. What happens if I'm going to print like Venus without even defining what is Venus, right? Like this, it's again going to throw an error that Venus is not defined because in itself you have not defined Venus as a variable. Over here, planet name was a variable which we have defined earlier before printing it, and that's why this is running without any kind of errors, unlike this thing that you are seeing over here. And the same kind of concept has been used over here. In order to print hello world, I need to pass it in the format of this kind of quotation marks so that it is converting this kind of data into string. And now Python understands automatically that go ahead and print this string data. It's not a variable anymore. If you don't give this kind of quotation marks, it expects this hello to be a some kind of a variable. You can again see there is some kind of automatic yellow line appearing, right? Because we haven't defined this hello. If I run this, it's going to run into an error, right? So that was the reason why I was having even the quotation mark in the first code that I had shown you guys to print hello world. So that's how you can define a string in Python with the help of this quotation marks. Now it's not that you always use this kind of double quotation marks. You can use single quotation mark. I can do the same thing by giving this kind of single quotation mark. This is also a string. I can go ahead and print the same thing. It's going to be Venus this time, right? I'm going to delete this code. And now I can also use, let's say, 3 quotation marks, either of single type or double type. Even that is fine. Again, this is pretty much useful when you want to create a string which is of multiple lines. So let's say I want to give a description line by line. Let's say this is Venus, right? And now I want to give this information that planet name is Venus. Okay, now I want to give this kind of information. This is the second planet in our solar system. First is Mercury, second is Venus, right? So this kind of information, if I'm giving over here, if I want to store it in multiple lines, for that I'll require to have this kind of 3 quotation marks, either of single type or double type. Okay, I can change this to double also. 3 double quotations, even that will be fine. Okay, but before I run this code cell, before I go ahead and run this code cell, I'm going to print it. See, this is how you are getting multiple lines of the text, right? Now if I run this code and again I run this, you will say there is no change because essentially it's happening the same thing. But now what happens if you're trying to have this kind of multiple lines of code with either single quotation or double quotation like this? It's not going to work. It's only capable of taking this kind of multiple text by using 3 quotation marks of either single or double type. So yeah, that's the idea with respect to strings. Now you can store as many kind of information with respect to this kind of planet. For example, name of the planet is Venus. I want to give Venus to it. Then let's say if I want to store the age of the planet, approximately Venus is about 4.6 billion years old. So planet age is 4.6 billion years, right? I can write this kind of information over here. I can also write, let's say, what is the index of this planet? Planet index. What do you mean by this planet index? That on the first index, we are having Mercury. On the second index, we are having Venus. On the third index, we are having Earth, right? So Venus comes on the second index. So you can store this value is equal to 2, right? Now let's say in Python, if I talk about indexes, if I be very specific with respect to indexes, in Python, we start from index 0. We don't start with index 1. That's one thing you need to keep in mind. I'll also give a comment over here indicating that in Python, index starts from 0. Hence, Venus is on index 1 after Mercury on index 0. If I wanted to store the information with respect to Mercury, I would have written the planet index equal to 0 because it's the first planet we are having in our solar system, right? So that's the reason why we'll be indexing that as 0. Now Venus, because it's the second planet, we'll be calling it as at index 1. Now one more interesting thing that you can do over here is, if I'm just going to run this code, and now if I print this information, that is name of the planet and planet age and also the planet index. Okay, now if I'm going ahead and running this code, it's printing me all of this respective information. Now if I want to check the type of the data, if it's a string type, if it's a integer type, or if it's a float type. Now what is the meaning of float? If you are having a number in decimals, okay, if you're having any kind of numbers in either fractions or decimals, then you simply call it as a float number. So if I'm trying to check the type in Python, what I need to do is, along with printing them variable, I also want to check the type of the variable. So what I do is, along with printing this variable name, I am giving one more command in Python called type. And now what is this type going to do? It's simply going to reveal what is the data type that has been stored in the respective variables. That's the thing that I'm trying to look after. And now if I simply run this code, you can see that the first two things are of class string. It means that this planet age and the planet name, both of them are storing a data that is in the format of strings. When I talk about planet index, now that is not a string, that is an integer. Okay. Now, just because I also discussed about the float, let's say I'm creating one more variable, let's say any random variable for that matter, z, and I'm giving some number to it, 3.2. Now I explained that any kind of decimal number or a number that you are able to express in fraction, you can call them as a float type. So if I go ahead and print the type of variable z, see what happens. You will be seeing that it's coming out as a float. So yeah, this was a very quick introduction with respect to what are strings. And not only strings, we have also discussed about integers and floats. So these are some basic data types that you must know in order to go ahead in this particular program. Now, in the next particular video, I'll be explaining you with respect to what are some kind of ways through which you can play around with the strings and do some more beautiful stuff when it comes to strings. Alright guys, so that was it about this particular video over here. Let us have a quick summary of what all things we have covered in a step-by-step manner. So first of all, we understood the concept of runtime in Google Colab, as in how if you are not maintaining the order of if you are defining the variable first and then using it, or maybe if you're using it before to test some kind of code after defining it, then how the restarting of the runtime will cause errors in your notebook. After that, we looked into some basic data types that are string, integer, and float. Now in the upcoming video, you are going to understand the concept of f-string, and that's my personal favorite concept, and you are just going to love it as well. So stay tuned for that.